Today I'm sitting with Ian Ziskin, one of the most respected and influential people leaders in modern business. Ian is a global CHRO, CPO with decades of experience leading people strategy at scale, including senior executive roles at Northrop Grumman, Qwest Communications, and TRW. He's known for building high-impact HR operating models, shaping leadership and culture inside complex organizations, and helping companies navigate transformation without losing the human thread. And Ian isn't just an HR practitioner. He's also an author. His latest book, Lives Lost in Leadership Found: Lessons from Special Somebodies, explores leadership through the lens of love, loss, and the people who shape who we become. If you care about where HR is headed and what credibility actually looks like in the practice, this conversation is one you'll want to see. I'm genuinely excited to share this because Ian doesn't just do HR theater, he actually does the real work.
There's a simple country smile on the face of a new city girl. She says the roof it leaks and the rent is high. There's no better place in the world. It's a long way down, back to the bottom.
Right. We are on with Ian Ziskin today. Ian, I am so excited to have you here with us. You're the first recording of Beneath the Surface podcast 2026, and we are totally pumped to have you in the studio with us today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Gina, thanks for the invitation. Great to be with you.
So we are just kind of jump into this. Why don't you tell our listeners / viewers a little bit about you?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for asking. Yeah, I've been in the HR and leadership game in one way or another for the past 43 plus years. First 28 years of my career, I spent working for large companies, primarily in HR. Toward the latter part of my corporate life, I was the chief HR officer for two different companies, most recently a company called Northrop Grumman, which is in the aerospace and defense industry.
Yes.
Was very fortunate to have somewhat stumbled into a career that I've absolutely loved, including my corporate life, where I had a chance to do a lot of interesting things and travel the world and move all over the United States, and probably made every mistake you could make and learn from those and maybe a few random successes along the way. About 15 years ago, however, my entrepreneurial side began popping out a little bit more aggressively. And as much as I loved my corporate life, I decided then to launch my own coaching and consulting firm called Exec Excel Group, which has always been a portfolio of different things. I won't bore you with all the pieces and parts, but a lot of coaching of senior level leaders, a lot of leadership development work, a lot of working with more entrepreneurial kinds of people on boards of directors and advisory boards for smaller, more entrepreneurial kinds of firms, which has been great learning for me. And then do a fair amount of writing as well, and written a number of books along the way, and spent some time presenting on that. So overall, I'd have to say, over these 43 plus years, very, very fortunate to be in a profession that I'm very passionate about, and have had the opportunity to work with, literally thousands of people from whom I've learned a lot, and I hope perhaps have helped some of them here and there be more effective and successful as well.
Yeah, and absolutely. At risk of blowing smoke here, I'll just share with our viewers, you and I had met through a mutual professional colleague who I adore. And once I sort of, kind of looked into your work, as a 20 plus year experience, I mean, we're just dating ourselves here, whatever, professional, I was just like, wow, this material is really, really very fantastic on so many different levels. And, I was very passionate both as I guess, as you might say, as a blogger and now into the world of podcasting, about really kind of sharing and spreading the wealth and the people that are involved in that as it relates to the human resources profession at large. And I don't know, I'm just going to be goofy here, like very, very passionate about sharing the folks that, frankly have tons of experience, whether it's, practical in print, media, etc., about really kind of how things are supposed to be done. Because quite frankly, Ian, and I know you and I talked a little bit about this before today, but I feel like we are losing a sense of that. And I've talked to many of our colleagues, as you know, and I think there's sort of a consensus around that. So I just I loved just kind of going on and diving into because quite frankly, your materials are all over the web, if you will, which is awesome, and very easy for everyone to access. But that said, and before I forget, you are working on something as we speak. I don't I apologize, I can't remember if it's actually finished or you're getting ready to launch it.
Yeah. So if I think you're referring to our latest book, so if I'm heading down the
Yes.
path,
Just want to
stop
make
me.
sure
But yes, it's called Lives Lost and Leadership Found: Lessons from Special Somebodies. It is finished. It came out actually in early October, so it's been out for a few months. And that's been kind of a labor of love, if you will, over the course of the last year and a half to 2 years. I can, whenever you're ready, we can talk a little bit about some of the concepts of the book and what it's intended to address. But that's been not quite a full-time job over the course of this last year and a half to 2 years, but a fair amount of time and energy put into putting a book like that together.
Yeah, and if folks are paying attention, which by now they might have to, coincidentally, we had a BTS guest on in our first season, um, and it was just really coincidence, who also very engaged and passionate about the HR profession and experienced some really interesting life experience. I just repeated myself, but it wasn't a fortunate experience, and it kind of catapulted her into a whole different genre, if you will, and wrote a book as well. And I just love the synergies, because I can assure everyone at BTS did not do this on purpose, but I love how synergistic this is in sort of the flow of how things have been happening for folks, not necessarily the experiences themselves. Some have been positive, some have been negative, but just how things have become so thoughtful. And so I'd love for you to sort of setting this up here, the stage up for you to kind of share, with all of the content that you have produced overall. Yeah, how did you kind of come to this? How did what brought you to this sort of, we're going to put together the book in this way, and this is how we're going to do it.
Yeah, I think the basic premise for the book, first of all, just for context, is life and leadership lessons learned from lost loved ones. And of course,
Right.
people, often ask the question, well, why write a book about that? What got you started? In my particular case, it actually goes back very specifically to the year 2003, or sorry, the year 2023, just a couple of years ago, when my brother and mother both passed away about 6 months apart from each other. So in my brother's case, he was 60 at the time, relatively healthy, thought he was having a stroke, went to the hospital, quickly diagnosed with brain tumors and then suspicion of tumors throughout his body, which turned out to be true. So metastatic cancer all over his body. And literally from time he entered the hospital, diagnosis to his death was 8 days, so very fast. The only good news about that, of course, was that he didn't suffer very long, but it was kind of, sudden and a shock and unexpected. About 6 months later, my mother, who was 93, so I suppose you can't argue that somebody who's 93, when they pass away, it's unexpected, but I'm fond of saying that, she was fine right up until the time she wasn't, experiencing some stomach pains and discomfort, went to the hospital, literally within 4 or 5 hours, cardiac arrest, passed away. Her whole, body was kind of shutting down from the stress associated with this medical condition. So even though she passed away at 93, also fairly fortunate that she didn't suffer very long and was relatively healthy right up until almost the very end. But aside from the typical grief and experience that anybody would go through, in losing lost loved ones, I also found myself thinking about what did I learn from them about life and perhaps about leadership directly or indirectly, and then quickly realized from there, I'm not the only person on the planet who's ever lost a loved one. I wonder if there are other people out there who've processed loss in the same way that I have and have thought about what they might have learned about life or leadership from their own special somebody. So I reached out to quite a few people in my network, professional and personal, and asked people if they might be interested in collaborating on a book project. Lo and behold, quite a few people responded very affirmatively and positively that they'd like to contribute to the book. So we now have created this book where I'm the lead author and have written quite a few sections of the book. But more importantly to me, there are 35 essays and also a lot of survey input from literally hundreds of people who've contributed their voices to the book and the lessons that they have learned from lost loved ones who in many cases they might be parents or grandparents or siblings or spouses or friends, other family members, perhaps even former bosses or mentors or other work colleagues as well. So a pretty wide dispersion of the kinds of relationships that they had with these people, but in every single case, somebody who was very important to them in their life.
Yeah, and it fascinates me. So what, and if there was, what was the connection between, the work that you do and what you have been doing for many years and sort of writing a book in this way, like really focusing on loss? I'm trying not to lead the question here.
No. Well, first of all, to the point that you raised earlier about, people needing and wanting and trying to be more human,
Right.
there's a lot of business books out there and certainly a lot of leadership books out there that talk about leadership, but of course they're written in a fairly impersonal way, right? And one of the hypotheses that I had in putting this book together was that we're a compilation of lots of experiences, good and bad, in our lives. And one of the more consequential experiences that most of us go through at some point or another is losing somebody who's very special and close to us. Got me thinking, of course, about, can you turn lemons into lemonade? It's a very negative experience, losing somebody, but is there anything positive that can come out of it, particularly the human element of this. And so the whole book is really written from the angle of what are some valuable lessons about life and leadership that might make you a better human being, as a reader or as somebody who's gone through a similar experience of loss, but have you somewhat intentionally, stopped long enough to process not only the loss, but what you learned from the person that you lost. So it takes leadership to what I hope people will find to be a much more human, basic level in terms of how people are influenced by important events and important people around them. And of course, not surprisingly, even though every story is different, every person who's featured or talked about in the book
Right.
is different. There are some common themes that began to emerge in terms of what people learned. And of course, the other thing which really struck me, of course, was that, with no disrespect to the people who've passed away, fundamentally, all of them you would describe as ordinary people who've lived ordinary lives,
Mm-hmm.
who died, unfortunately, but in relatively ordinary ways, yet they were extraordinary in terms of the
Yes.
influence that they had on these, people around them, including the people who contributed to the book. So there were differences, of course, but a lot of common themes. And if you'd like, we can talk about some of those common themes as we continue to the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing I'd like to ask is, what about the leadership piece? So you mentioned leadership, and I ask specifically for the listeners, the audience, is, how as a leader, how are you defining leadership? This has come up a few times, right? Because one might say, well, hey, I don't manage a team of people. I don't X, Y, and Z, right? And it's really defining leadership and then defining it in a way that you were hoping folks read your book to extrapolate, some of these lessons and themes, etc.
Right. Well, let's go real basic for a minute, because you actually asked a very
Yes.
interesting question. We don't attempt in the book to sell a definition of leadership, even though there's
Okay.
a million good leadership books, and I guess some bad ones out there too, that attempt to define leadership. But one of the things that's really obvious when you write the book and then you go through it is that leadership is not a title or a responsibility. Everybody can be a leader in their own way, at their own level, in whatever role they play in life, because it really has a lot more to do about being an influence, positive or negative, on other people around you, and hopefully making other people better and more effective rather than not as good and less effective, right? And that came through over and over and over again, because the vast majority of people who got written about in the book, most people would say, didn't consider themselves to be leaders, didn't think they were playing a leadership role, particularly in their relationship with their family members. Yet every single person who wrote about their quote unquote special somebody, saw that person playing a leadership role, not because they had some formal leadership title or responsibility, but because they were a very significant influence and multiplier effect on them by being around that person. And those lessons, tended to stick with people. The other thing, which was, quite fascinating to me, that I should have been smart enough to see coming in advance, but I really didn't until we got much deeper into the experience, was having people write about somebody so important to them turned out to be a very cathartic experience. There was a lot of emotional, release, including the fact that some of the people being written about had passed away only a matter of months, or in some cases, a couple of years, like my mother and brother, prior to the book coming out. Yet other people who contributed essays, for example, ended up telling stories about people who'd passed away 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 or more years ago.
Amazing.
Yet
Yep.
the level of emotional release and catharsis and influence that that person had on them was equal, if not greater, than to the people who'd lost somebody much more recently. I found that very powerful, and I probably should have anticipated that, but didn't, frankly.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. And I know many of us have heard, most of us have heard, not all, that, just writing, journaling about things in general, right, just sort of helps for the release of whatever it is that we're thinking about. So I'm sure folks that contributed, uh, yeah, it was a very cathartic experience and probably very therapeutic at the same time. Um, yeah, I ask about the leadership piece because we we have many different folks that are interested in viewing the topics that we talk about and don't really realize that these themes actually apply to them on a daily basis. You don't have to be, either in the official workplace or a human resources professional or whatever it is to understand what some of these themes that we are and talk about they apply to everyone. And I think that that's, especially with this book and some of the things that I know you were trying to accomplish and did accomplish, frankly, I just think it's pretty tremendous. So thank you for that.
Well, thanks. You're very kind. But if I could, let's just take a minute to,
Sure.
double click and emphasize for your audience this question about, leader and who's a leader, because I would really encourage anybody who's listening to us talk not to self-edit or sell themselves short in terms of their role in being a leader. It might be within their family, it might be among their group of friends, it might be some organization, community-based, et cetera, that they may be actively involved in, sports team, musical group, whatever it might be. In addition to the workplace, you as an individual, each of us as individuals, has a profound influence on the people around us. So, ask
Right.
yourself the question, is it going to be a positive influence, where you're setting a good example, or is it going to be a negative influence where people are going to be thinking about you and thinking to themselves, I never want to act like or behave like or lead like that person because
Exactly.
they set a pretty bad example. And that really, really resonated with me personally, as the
Hmm.
leader of the book. Hopefully, when you write a book, you're able to teach people something they didn't know. But I also think when you write a book, you should learn something, right? And one of the things I learned was the extraordinary influence that, average, ordinary people can have just based on the way that they carry themselves and the lessons that they knowingly, or in some cases unknowingly, teach other people who are around them. The trick is, step back just long enough to process what you've learned from that person. And the other thing, I think, if you're going to come through a negative experience like losing a loved one, you have to be intentional about it. So for example, there's this old adage about time heals all wounds. Well,
Right.
after writing this book, I actually don't believe that. I do believe that time contributes to healing wounds. But
Right.
what I actually think is more important is intentionality, actually going through the intentional process of not only grieving, because I think that's important, and we all grieve in different ways, but then, stepping back and asking yourself, what did I learn from this person? What did I learn from this experience? How am I going to intentionally process that and come out the other side hopefully a better human being for having gone through this negative, difficult experience, as opposed to just saying, well, if I sit on my couch for the next couple of years and
Right.
feel sorry for myself, hopefully I'll feel better a couple of years from now after feeling sorry for myself. That's not to diminish the grief that people feel. I respect
Right.
them,
Right.
but I really want to encourage people to be more intentional about their learning and the processing of the grief and what they're going through, so that they come out the other end with some lessons learned about life and hopefully leadership as well, that make them better people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that that's, one of the things that we are focused on is the intentionality and the discernment, right? Moving forward. We're so quick, we as a society, human beings are just so quick to jump to the next, no matter what that next is, that we're not really thinking about the moment, meeting ourselves in the moment and what that really means. And it could be in the workplace, it could be personally in a relationship, whatever. And so, if we can bring, topics like this to the surface, and apply it across so that people walk away with, I hate to use this expression, but those aha moments, I think it's, we've accomplished something in giving back.
Well, certainly for me, at least in this experience of putting the book together, one of the aha moments was this realization about intentionality and the value of being
Right.
intentional in your approach, as opposed to just letting things happen to you. I mean, you have to feel. I think you do need to feel. Allow yourself to feel the loss and the grief in whatever way is, most comforting and productive for each of us as individuals. But one of the things that I think often gets overlooked, so I'll just emphasize it again, is intentionally thinking about, what you learn from this person. It's one of the reasons why there's a section in the book at the very end, in the appendix, where we actually make the recommendation to the reader to write their own essay about
Right.
their own special somebody. And that wasn't even supposed to be part of the book. The reason why I ended up including it in the book kind of at the last minute, honestly, was because of this catharsis and emotional release that all the contributors to the book expressed to me. So, of course, I started thinking about, well, if they're having this positive, cathartic experience, even though difficult in certain ways, writing about a lost loved one, wouldn't it also be true potentially that anybody who reads the book, if we encourage them to write an essay about a special somebody that perhaps they've lost, or even someone who may still be living, may still be with us, which is preferred, but
Yes.
why wait till the person dies before you actually process, what you are learning from that person? Now, some individuals would say, well, I'm not really interested in writing something and sharing it in a book or putting it online on LinkedIn or whatever for the entire world to see. That's perfectly fine. I think there are lots of people who just get comfort simply by writing it for themselves, or
That's right.
writing it for their own family. To the point you raised earlier, Gina, about just the processing of a loss. One way to do that is to journal or to write about it. And so, somewhat coincidentally, early January, we're now getting ready to launch a essay awards process
Oh,
for,
nice.
for individuals who have not yet contributed to the book, but might benefit from the experience of writing an essay about their own special somebody. We're actually going to have some prizes to encourage people to write and submit the essays to us. It's really much more for the individual to go through the experience and have the benefit of the experience of writing an essay about somebody really important to them than it is for us, to collect the essays. They'll be very interesting to read and to see, but mostly we'd like to have other individuals have the positive cathartic experience that all of our essay contributors had by writing something.
Yeah, I saw that, and I think that's fantastic because I think it really just does, it just supports what it is slash was that you are trying to accomplish, right? It's like a full circle moment, not only having folks participate and express themselves in this book, but they also gained in their own way whatever that experience was. And so did you, and I'm sure, some of your team, but then to have folks who actually participated in the reading have that ability to also contribute both, personally and if they want to enter, you know, I think we should just have more of that. That's just my opinion, you know. We've lost that. I don't know if we even ever really had it, to be quite frank, but I think we definitely need more of it. And when I say we, I mean the macro we, right? From an experience perspective and and I'll include myself, from those of us who are really trying to give back in our, whether they're big or small ways, bring people along. I think it's really very helpful and very, very needed. So I just love how you have it all sort of constructed, if you will.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And, if we could maybe just take another minute or two,
Absolutely.
take it down, a level of abstraction for anybody who's listening who might want to know, well, what were some of the common themes that popped
It-
out? Because you could imagine, talking about literally hundreds of people by the time we were done, all these different stories, all these different lives, was there anything common? And there certainly were some common themes. So let me just share maybe three of them real quickly, just to give
Please.
people a
Yeah.
sense of what they might, pick up in the book. So, fundamentally, I think there were three categories of things that popped out over and over again. One was around courage, one was around compassion, and one was around curiosity, right? So let me just double click on each one of those just briefly for a minute. So as it relates to courage, think about, combination of courage and resilience. Many of the stories had a lot to do with a certain amount of fearlessness and determination and overcoming,
Right.
incredible odds and obstacles, and the willingness to, push back and fight through difficult things and bounce back, in fact, from those difficult things, including the fact that this old expression about, he or she who dies with the most toys wins. That was not the theme in the book. The theme in the book was he or she who dies with the most meaningful relationships wins, right? So there's a whole lot of connection to compassion
Okay.
as well as courage, in the sense of you know be there for other people, show up, have a sense of empathy, be great at listening, and this whole idea of he or she who dies with the highest quality, most high quality relationships is really ultimately the winner. So courage and compassion were two of the big themes. The third one was around curiosity and purpose. So there was a lot of
Okay.
stuff in there about um, live a life of no regrets, live life to the
Mm.
fullest, try a lot of stuff. You might fail, you might trip, get back up, learn from the experience, and follow your passions and align the way you're living your life with true sense of purpose. Now, all of those things are equally applicable to being a great leader as they are to being a great human being and living a highly fulfilled
Right.
life. And so, I think there's something to be learned from almost anyone we're around, who's really important to us if we pay attention.
That's exactly right. I'm curious about Was there anything that was like surprising in a disappointing way? Like you were like, oh wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would say that was maybe surprising and disappointing was the fact that so many people, even those who contributed to the book, had bottled up for, in some cases, a very long time,
Hmm.
the the true feelings that they had experienced at losing this person, and kind of, in many cases, pushed it as far down as they possibly could internally. I think, for all the right reasons, which is, not wanting to fall apart in front of other
Of
people,
course.
not
Right.
wanting to sound like they're, whining and complaining about the loss, not wanting to be selfish, and in some cases, just not wanting to actually deal with the feelings, right? But when
Oh
you
yeah.
combine all of those things together, what it taught me was we don't really have a great way in society of helping people overtly acknowledge and process loss.
We don't.
And we don't really have a great way in society of overtly encouraging people to talk about what they've learned from loss either, right? And so that was disappointing in the sense that you'd liked there to be a more robust set of outlets
Hmm.
and opportunities for people to express and for people to, not only learn for themselves, but also to share that learning and the teaching that goes along with it with other people who would benefit, right? So, it turns out, from what I've been able to tell, writing a book that's fundamentally a leadership book, but which focuses on life and leadership lessons from loss, isn't
Right.
all that common, right? There's not a lot of books or other materials out there that are, very specific to that orientation toward life and leadership. And that's kind of a shame, right? Because I do think that a lot of individuals would benefit more if we were societally comfortable with how do you process loss, but going a step beyond the loss, being intentional, as I said earlier,
Hmm.
about sharing what you might have learned from the person you lost. Because I think it's a teaching moment. It's an opportunity for people to get better. And as a result of getting better, they get stronger, and come out the other side, perhaps, an even higher quality human being than they,
Absolutely.
they were before they went into that experience. That was probably the most disappointing thing that I picked up as we were putting the book together.
Yeah. So just to kind of walk into the HR arena, if you will, for a minute. What, just in terms of the feedback that you may have received and some of your thoughts um, after the fact, what are some what are some lessons or some thoughts that you want to share with, an HR professional, an HR leader? What are some of the, lessons from learning about other people's losses that might be helpful or applicable to an HR professional in the workplace?
Yeah, I think the single biggest thing, honestly, is that most of us have no idea what other people are carrying around and still trying to
Amen.
function, right? And
Yeah.
and it's not just you may have lost somebody important to you, even though that's obviously a big one, but simply, just the day-to-day stresses and strains of financial difficulties,
Hmm.
difficulties with raising children, elder care, parenting issues, child care, marital stress. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And most people do their best, even though it's not always probably the healthiest choice, do their best to kind of internalize that.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we like to say a lot, we want people to feel comfortable to bring their whole selves to work.
Right.
Most organizations and organization cultures and bosses, for that matter, don't do the greatest job of really encouraging that. And when the person does bring their whole self to work, if part of the whole self includes problems or issues,
Right.
people don't really want to hear about those problems and issues. And so, as an HR professional, I would say, always be on the alert for the unobvious, right? Something that's going on behind the scenes, beneath the surface, that might be driving somebody's lousy performance or different kind of behavior than what you're typically used to seeing, or a certain amount of negativity or pushback or bad attitude or whatever terms you want to use to describe somebody pushing back. uh, Sometimes it's just because they're a difficult person, but in many cases, there's something else going on. And
Right.
I've always tried to think of myself as a reasonably empathetic person. But one thing that I've realized, I've learned about myself, from this whole experience of writing this book, is that you can really never be empathetic enough, in terms of trying to understand circumstances from the other person's point of view. And that's kind of an untapped skill, I think, for not only for HR people, but for anybody who has people leadership responsibility, is to be a better, more empathetic person and leader. Will make you a much more effective leader because you'll have a tendency to get the most out of people who
Mm-hmm.
feel seen and heard and understood, and
Yes.
many people do not.
Yes. And I think one of the things, and this may not come out very elegantly, but, as an HR, let's say practitioner, right, there are many, many, many difficult things that we have to either deal with, interact, um, people, places, things, right? And we're humans and we come to the table just like everyone else does to work, to our workplace with things, right? And we're bringing our whole selves, or at least we'll say we're bringing our whole selves to work, and then having to encounter many difficult topics like terminating folks or investigating some horrific employee relations event or you name it, there's a coffee table list of it. I think where I'm going with this, Ian, is that there is a sort of that skill set, right? And I think what I'm trying to do here is um acknowledge HR professionals, and I'm not just saying this applies to us. We're just specifically talking about HR professionals today. We have to have the ability, right, to almost in the same way when we lose somebody, to sort of, I want to say, sort of cut that off, right? Because we're entering the workplace, we're dealing with these very delicate situations that most folks, employees don't understand because we are people too. And so we may not want to investigate a really nasty sexual harassment case or terminate somebody for some terrible, awful thing. And we are human too. So I think what I'm trying to do is draw a parallel between, you know, writing about these really difficult losses to HR professionals that come with their whole selves to the workplace and have to deal with these very difficult situations. And what does that mean to the regular, I'll say, person or employee that comes to the workplace? Because let's face it, HR is not, we're not everyone's favorite people. It doesn't matter what you specialize in or what level you are. And so just to help people understand that, we we kind of come to the workplace having all of what we have and then having to practice on behalf of the employees and the company some of these things that people don't realize, right? I'm not sure if I'm doing this justice, but kind of exploring this with you because it's sort of an appreciation that I'm trying to bring to the surface within our profession.
Right, right. Well, yes, I agree with everything that you've said. If I could, I'll add a little bit to it,
Please.
and
Yes.
maybe oversimplify just a little bit. So anybody who's listening to us, I would say, if you're an HR person or even just a leader of people, but outside of
Right.
the HR profession, and you're asking yourself the question, what's the single most important thing I can do to be effective, and add value? I'm going to oversimplify it by saying the following thing, which is face reality and deal with it, and then
Yes.
help other people face reality and deal with it. Because we spend a lot of time, whether it's difficult circumstances where empathy is required, or whether it's telling somebody that their performance is somehow not up to the standard, or that they're a difficult person, or they're going to get laid off and lose their job. I think we have this tendency, because we're human beings, to try to be gentle where we can be gentle, and subtle where we can be subtle, and not want to offend people. And I'm not in any way suggesting that our objective is to offend people, but what I am suggesting is we do everybody a disservice, including ourselves as HR
Right.
leaders, people leaders, if we're not honest with people.
Hmm.
And so, the better we are at defining reality, not only at the individual level, in terms of how you're doing as a person and what your
Right.
performance is and what we expect of you, but at the organizational level, here's how the company is doing. Here's what's happening in the industry. Our competitors are eating our lunch. Here's why. This is what we need to do to change course. All the way to there's illness and death in the family or among friends, and we're trying to figure
Hmm.
out how to deal with that reality, right? And in many cases,
Right.
there's facts that we can't change. The better that we are at facing up to reality, helping ourselves, and then helping other people to confront and deal with that reality, the more effective we're going to be, and the
Yes.
more effective everybody around us is going to be. And I say that, not only from the perspective of, writing a specific books, that we've been talking about, Lives Lost and Leadership Found, but
Right.
from, 43 plus years of, working in HR and working with lots of leaders and making lots of mistakes, and seeing how, how people are made to be more effective or less effective. So I would certainly encourage anybody who's part of your audience who's struggling a little bit with how do I up my game just a little bit and be even more effective than I am now, even if I'm highly effective. One of the best things I've seen great leaders do, HR or non-HR leaders,
Right.
help people understand what the reality is that we're dealing with, and then actually deal with it, rather than getting mired down in the way we'd prefer it to be, or what we wish was the case, or we don't want to offend people or hurt their feelings, and therefore we kind of shade the truth or don't tell them what they really need to hear. You're not really doing anybody a favor, because it turns out in our spirit of trying to avoid offending people, the most offensive thing we can do to other people, I find, is to lie to them. And if they feel like they're being lied to, that is probably the most successful way to offend somebody, is to cause them to feel like they're not getting the truth. So if we can do a better job of that, we'll up our game rather substantially.
Oh, hands down. I mean, I just couldn't agree with that more. And, I want people to kind of rewind and listen to that maybe 3 or 4 times. Um, seriously, because I think that that is one of the things that we need at a macro level desperately. Um, you know, People are just simply very concerned And in some cases, they have every right to be about what that would look like from a retaliatory perspective, because retaliation is real. And, people have written and probably can write tons of books on what that looks like.
Right.
Right. And so they're listening to us saying, yeah, okay, brother, that sounds great. But guess what happened to me when I did that type of thing? So we could go on and on forever about this stuff, but I appreciate you mentioning that because I think it's a huge takeaway. And more of us need to, kind of put our shields on, our invisible shields, if you will, and take that, leap of faith. What are we missing about the book? Because I definitely want to talk to you more about this book and your experience overall. And being that it's only a few months out there, I really want to hear what people are learning from this book and how they really are interacting with the book and what that means, or has meant moving forward. So I'm excited, and I hope other folks are excited about that too. But what are we missing, in sort of a highlight here, Ian? What are we missing, or what am I missing? Um, by question wise, not asking you.
Yeah, don't think we've really missed anything crucial, thanks to your very very good questions. But I'll use the opening as just an opportunity to go back and maybe underscore one thing that we've talked about a couple of times, because I do think it's so important here, is the idea of any of us at the individual level, all of us going through, some kind of difficult experience that we can't control. This book happened to focus a lot on, losing a lost loved one, but there are many other life experiences that are difficult or
Right.
challenging that don't involve somebody passing away. Yet I think the principle of intentionally learning from the experience is one that I really want to underscore for anybody who's within the sound of our voices, right? I think sometimes we have a tendency to want to skate through the experience as fast and as
Hmm.
painlessly as possible so we can move on from it. That's very understandable and it's very human. But I also think there's a lost opportunity in that, which is stop just long enough to process and say, what am I learning as a result of going through this difficult experience? And how am I going to come out the other side a better, more effective person and perhaps leader as well, as a result of consciously, intentionally processing what I've learned? So the
Hmm.
going through the experience and surviving it, of course, is really important, but making sure that you actually learn something of value and come out the other side better as a result is also really important. And I just would encourage anybody who's part of your audience not to lose sight of that intentionality aspect of the learning.
Agree. Because as terrible as it is to lose someone in your life, um, there's a lesson in that. And I know folks are tired of hearing, well, this happened for a reason, quote unquote, right? But you know what? Things do happen for a reason. And just taking that step back and that time to digest it, as you said, I won't repeat everything. I think it's just so critical, very critical.
Well, in the book,
So,
we have this chapter. It's called The Tensions of Intentionality, and it's really all about these paradoxes that you
yes.
have to work your way through. And there's this social media influencer who I think has a really, great way of expressing this. Her name is Giselle Ibarra, who says life is a paradox. In order to heal, you must hurt. And I actually
Yep.
think that, for me, was a very profound realization, which is there are a number of paradoxes or competing priorities or competing feelings that you have to work your way through. But in order to go through the healing process, you also have to go through the hurting process and be able to, feel things enough and think about them enough and learn from them enough in order to heal. It's a process.
That's right. Yeah, and we could talk about this forever and ever. Well, Ian, it's been a pleasure having you, and yeah, this conversation's not over. I think this is just the beginning, and I'm excited to learn more about it. Admittedly, I haven't gotten through the entire book, but I look forward to actually participating in the activity and the lesson myself. So yes, I'm one of those
Appreciate the
people
interest in the
that's,
book and the
yeah.
invitation to be with you today. And of course, I like you were suggesting, I welcome more conversation and anything I can do to help any of your listeners as they listen to the podcast. Happy to do so as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
He says it's a long way down, back to the bottom.